Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories.
Story number 1. The interstate at 3 in the morning was an endless ribbon of muted silver, swallowed on both ends by the kind of darkness that felt more like water than air. High beams washed over the center lines and the reflective studs along the shoulder, turning them into little floating eyes that flicked past in a measured, hypnotic beat. Out beyond the guardrails, the flat Midwestern fields were gone, obscured by a steadily thickening wall of fog that had rolled in quietly, the way a thought arrives before a person realizes they're thinking it. It swallowed trees, billboards, entire exit ramps, until the world was reduced to a narrow tunnel of visibility, no wider than the reach of one set of headlights. In the cab of the northbound Freightliner, the hum of the diesel engine was a low, steady companion. The dashboard glowed in soft jewel tones, greens and ambers and tiny red dots that never blinked. The clock on the radio read 3:07 a.m. Daniel Hale drove with his hands loose on the wheel, fingertips feeling the faint vibration of the road through worn leather. He had been on this route more times than he could count, running overnight freight from the distribution hub south of Bloomington up to the warehouses near the lake. It was a quiet run, usually, a long black corridor of road broken only by the occasional set of passing headlights and the distant promise of a rest stop's sodium orange glow. Tonight felt different, but he couldn't have said why at first. The rig moved cleanly through the gears, the trailer rode straight, and the load behind him was light, pallets of boxed linens, nothing that groaned or shifted with the turns. Yet there was a subtle wrongness in the air, like the sense of a room having just been vacated by someone in a hurry. The CB was hushed except for soft static, no familiar voices chewing over weather reports or construction delays. The radio fuzzed between stations, the usual late-night country ballads and tired talk shows dissolving into a low, omnipresent hiss. He glanced at the passenger seat where a paper coffee cup from a truck stop 2 hours back rested against a folded road atlas. It had gone cold, but he sipped it anyway, more for the small ritual than the taste. The coffee was bitter and thin. It grounded him. He blinked slowly, watching the fog thicken, watching it curl in the beams like pale smoke. The world felt walled in and narrow. The sky had long since disappeared, leaving nothing above the windshield but vague gray. The green exit signs, when they emerged from the murk, did so abruptly and without warning, looming close before sweeping past into oblivion. Each steel post was beaded with moisture, catching the light in brief, ghostly flashes. He passed a blue sign promising gas, food, lodging. All of it might as well have been painted onto the fog itself. He could see none of the access roads, none of the distant gas station canopies, no stray porch lights from farmhouses. Only that tunnel, only that strip of road. Up ahead, in the farthest reach of his high beams, a shape eased into being, the pale glow of another vehicle's taillights, diffused and hazy through the fog. 2 soft red points hung in the darkness like a pair of suspended embers. Daniel felt a ripple of relief he hadn't known he was waiting for. Another trucker, another person awake in this narrow, cotton-wrapped night. The company of strangers on the road was a quiet, unspoken comfort. He eased off the accelerator ever so slightly, letting the distance close at a civilized pace. The speedometer hovered just above 62. The red lights ahead bobbed faintly, steady in rhythm like the swing of a lantern. As he drew closer, details began to sharpen, the blocky outline of a trailer, the faint reflective stripes along its lower edge, the dark shape of the tractor pulling it. It was a rig, yes, but older somehow, squarer in the shoulders, lower to the ground. The trailer doors bore no company logo, just a faded white rectangle turned almost gray, edges streaked with grime. The license plate on the rear bumper flashed a muddy green in his headlights, just for a second, enough for his brain to register an impression instead of a clear image. Something about its color and shape didn't fit with what he expected. The letters looked unfamiliar, the sequence too short. It might have been nothing. It might have been the fog. Daniel narrowed his eyes briefly, leaning forward just an inch. Then he sat back, reminding himself not to fuss with the details. Long night, tired eyes, tricks of light. He'd seen stranger things on clearer roads that turned out to be simple. A tarp flapping oddly, a mud-smeared reflective decal looking like a face. Out here, alone in the small hours, the mind learned to entertain itself. He settled in behind the other truck at a polite distance, about 5 tractor lengths, letting the faint red glow ahead provide a kind of guide. The fog was densest near the ground, a rolling undercurrent of white, but it thinned a little at windshield height. He could see enough. He could keep the trailer's faint silhouette centered between the dashed lane markers. The other driver held a steady, unhurried pace. There was a comfort in matching it, in letting someone else set the tempo. Minutes slid by. The clock's digital bars shifted from 3:07 to 3:19, then to 3:26. The only sounds were the soft rumble of the engine, the occasional whir of the cooling fan, the faint whisper of tires against damp asphalt. The world was gray and red and the muted green of dashboard lights. It occurred to Daniel slowly that he hadn't seen another sign for some time. No exit numbers, no rest area notices, no mile markers ticking up in regular, predictable intervals. The last one he remembered was 313 back 10 minutes, or was it 15? The memory didn't feel anchored. It floated. The numbers, once so orderly, slid around in his mind. He glanced to the right, searching the murk for the retroreflective glint of the next marker. The fog swallowed the shoulder. Up ahead, the taillights wavered. For one brief second, they seemed to rise, lifting higher from the road than they should have, as though the truck had crested a small hump he hadn't felt beneath his own tires. Then they settled again, floating at their usual height, steady and unwavering. He frowned, his fingers tightening just a fraction on the wheel. As if in answer, the radio crackled softly, a breath of sound shivering through the static. He reached toward the dial on instinct, not to change the station this time, just to make sure it was still there. Beneath the hiss, a faint thread of something emerged, a few notes, so distant and thin they seemed more imagined than heard. Old, maybe. A melody built on clean, simple chords. The kind of song that might have played on diner jukeboxes decades ago. The notes sharpened, grew clearer, then slid back into the wash of white noise. His fingertips paused on the plastic knob. Somewhere in the back of his thoughts, a childhood memory stirred, riding in his father's pickup. A crackling AM station. A man's voice singing about a long road and a lonely sky. He almost smiled, but the expression didn't quite form. The taillights ahead suddenly brightened, a brief flare as the other driver tapped their brakes. The red glow flooded the fog, painting the tunnel in soft, eerie crimson. Daniel glanced at his own speedometer, still just above 60. No reason to slow that he could see. No obstruction, no curve ahead, no change in grade. The brake lights dimmed again, returning to their normal, dull glow. He was closer now, close enough to see that the trailer's reflective stripes were different from the ones on his own rig. Thinner, positioned slightly higher. Old-style markings, perhaps. It fit with the vague sense of age that clung to the other truck. Some company running an outdated trailer, he told himself. Not everyone updated their equipment on the same timetable. The radio's static swelled and dipped, the melody resurfacing in little fragments like flotsam on a restless sea. A snatch of guitar, the suggestion of a harmonica, a sonorous male voice on the edge of words. Then nothing, just the steady hush. He realized with a small prickle at the base of his neck that he could no longer see any light beyond the truck in front of him. No slivers of yellow from distant farmhouses. No streaks of white from oncoming cars. No gray hint of sky. It was as if the world had narrowed to this one stretch of interstate, this one set of taillights, and the sound of an almost song in the static. The next sign he saw rose from the fog with abrupt, almost startling clarity. A green rectangle on a silver pole, beads of moisture catching and scattering his headlights. Mile 313. He watched it slide past, eyes following the numbers as they disappeared into the murk behind him. A moment later, another sign emerged. Again, the same clean green, the same white reflective numerals. 313, exactly the same. He stared at it, more curious than alarmed at first, trying to convince himself he had misread the first one. Maybe it had been 312. Maybe the fog had blurred the lines, merged them. It was late. He was tired. The third sign came sooner than he expected. Mile 313. Again. The same tilt to the pole, the same rust stain along the bottom edge of the panel. He had time to notice a small dark smudge near the numeral one, like the imprint of an old sticker long peeled away. When it slid by and vanished, the memory of that smudge stayed vivid. He cleared his throat, though no one could hear him. The wheel felt slightly slick under his palms. His coffee sat untouched, the cup now just an object rather than a source of comfort. The radio's phantom music had faded again, leaving only the whisper of static, soft and insistent like far-off ocean surf. Up ahead, the taillights flickered. Not the sharp flare of braking, not the steady burn of running lights, but a flicker, as though a gust of wind had passed through the filaments. The fog swirled, thickened, and for a fraction of a second the red points smeared into vertical streaks, like drops of ink bleeding downward. Then they snapped back into focus. Daniel eased off the throttle, letting himself fall a little farther behind. The distance was harder to gauge now. The fog toyed with perspective, making near and far seem interchangeable. He watched the other truck's outline soften and sharpen, as though it were an image on an old television screen struggling for signal. "All right," he murmured under his breath, the first sound he had made in some time. It came out calmer than he felt. "We're not doing this, it's just weather." The fourth mile 313 sign appeared on the right, and something in him resisted looking. But his gaze was drawn to it anyway, as if pulled by a quiet magnetic insistence. Same green, same numerals, same rust, same ghost of a sticker. The familiarity of those imperfections made it worse somehow. Not a trick of the mind. Not an imagined repetition. The exact same sign. Again. His pulse tapped just a touch faster. He checked the clock. 3:26 a.m. He was almost certain it had said that earlier. How much earlier, he couldn't say. The minutes had grown slippery, quiet things moving just out of reach. The radio chose that moment to stir again. The static thinned, a narrow channel opening in the hiss. The old song stepped forward, clearer this time, enough for him to catch a line. Miles to go before the dawn, the voice was warm, weary, edged with something like resignation. A few notes of steel guitar curled behind it like cigarette smoke. He swallowed, his throat dry. The line repeated, the exact same inflection, the exact same soft break on the word dawn, then began to blur, the consonants smearing into the wash of sound. It was a recording, obviously, but the repetition made it feel less like a song and more like a phrase being tried out, spoken again and again into a receptive silence. Ahead, the taillights brightened one more time in a brief, gentle flash. No break, no shift in the truck's silhouette, just light, swelling, and then receding. And then, with a smoothness that made it feel almost polite, they began to fade. At first, Daniel thought it was the fog thickening again, curtains closing between them. The red glow turned pink, then pale, then a suggestion of color more than color itself. The outline of the trailer softened, its corners rounding, its edges blurring. He leaned forward instinctively, squinting, willing his eyes to focus. A faint knot of unease turned in his gut. The taillights dwindled to 2 dim points, then to 1, then to none at all. There was no curve in the road, no hill, no exit for the other truck to have taken, no shoulder wide enough to accommodate something that size without his noticing. One moment the rig was there, a solid presence burning its small twin stars into the fog. The next, there was only empty road. For several heartbeats, Daniel drove on in stunned, automatic quiet. The engine hummed. The tires whispered. The fog pressed close to the glass. He watched the spot where the truck had been as though expecting it to reassemble out of the mist, to reveal that it had only slipped behind some optical fold in the weather. Nothing emerged. He reached for the CB mic, then hesitated, his fingers closing around it without depressing the button. What was there to say? To the northbound white trailer that just vanished. He imagined the responses. The teasing, the skepticism, the well-meaning questions about his last rest break. He set the mic back in its cradle, more gently than he needed to. The world felt emptier without the soft anchor of those taillights. The fog seemed thicker, the darkness beyond his headlights deeper. The absence of the other truck was a presence in itself. A hollow space he could feel but not describe. He drew a slow breath and glanced at the clock again. 3:26 a.m. The digits held steady, unmoving, as if waiting. Somewhere behind the static, barely audible, the line repeated itself one more time, almost tender. Miles to go before the dawn. He drove on alone through mile 313. Again. Story number 2. By 2 in the morning, the coastal interstate had emptied into something that no longer felt like a highway so much as a long, humming hallway suspended above a dark and restless ocean. Low clouds lay heavy over the unseen water, and from them, thick fog rolled in waves across the asphalt, pushed inland by a wind Maria Vega could hear but not see. Her truck's high beams dug 2 white tunnels through it, sharp at their centers and feathered into gray at the edges, where the world disappeared. Inside the cab, the night felt smaller, almost cozy. The dash glowed in deep blues and greens, gauges arching like half-moons, numbers steady and familiar. The soft amber of the sleeper curtain behind her suggested warmth she wouldn't touch until dawn. The steering wheel thrummed gently beneath her hands, a vibration that matched the low, constant rumble of the diesel. The reefer unit on the trailer purred every few minutes, a distant exhale that stirred the air. Maria sipped from a large, insulated mug, the coffee inside gone lukewarm but still carrying enough bitterness to keep her anchored. The radio, set to a station she didn't quite recognize, had given up on music 20 miles back, dissolving into a soft, persistent hiss. The CB was mostly quiet too, just the occasional crackle of a voice too faint to make out, like a neighbor talking in another room with the door nearly closed. Fog pressed against the windshield in slow, shifting patterns. It wrapped the world close, smudging the edges of the guardrails and shoulders, curling in threads around the bases of the overhead signs until they seemed to float, their green panels hovering in the void. When the wind changed, the fog moved like breath, gathering, parting, gathering again. She had seen coastal fog 100 times on this route, but tonight it felt especially thick, especially determined. Her GPS screen cast a faint, ghostly light over the center console. A thin purple line traced the interstate northward, a clean, unwavering path. A little blue triangle marked her rig, inching along at a steady 61. Next services, 45 miles, the display read, the text small and calm. She glanced at the fuel gauge, at the clock, 2:08 a.m., and calculated in that quiet way truckers do. She could push on to the next truck stop, stretch her legs there, get something hot that hadn't been sitting on a warmer for hours. Or she could pull into a rest area if one appeared sooner, catch 20 minutes with her eyes closed while the reefer hummed a white noise lullaby behind her. The road had its own ideas. A pale shape emerged in the blur ahead, higher than a mile marker but lower than an overpass. Her beams washed over it, revealing a wooden sign just off the right shoulder, the kind rarely seen on the newer stretches of interstate. The posts were thick and dark with age. The sign itself was painted a deep forest green, its letters carved and filled with white. Gull's Head Rest Area, 1 mile. The words seemed to float out of the fog, clear and uncompromising. For the briefest instant as she passed, she could see a stylized white gull cut into the board, wings outstretched. Then it slipped behind her and was gone. Maria frowned lightly, not in alarm, more in the way a person does when they hear a familiar word pronounced in an unfamiliar accent. She knew this stretch of road. She had been running this coastal line for 3 years, enough that she could picture the exit signs in her mind from memory. There was a state-maintained rest area somewhere near here, Yes, a concrete island of vending machines and picnic tables set back from a short ramp. But it had a standard green overhead sign, not an old wooden marker, and it wasn't called Gull's Head. The name landed in her mind with a soft, uncertain weight. She glanced down at the GPS again. Next services, 45 miles. No mention of a rest area a mile ahead. The map showed the interstate as a clean, uninterrupted stripe hugging the coastline, with a truck stop icon far up the route. Nothing closer. The CB crackled softly, a stirring in the comfortable quiet. A voice slipped through, faint and shivery at the edges, but recognizable as human. Anyone else hitting gulls tonight? Fog's thick as chowder out this way. The transmission dissolved into static before she could respond. A faint echo of laughter followed, or maybe just a spike in the noise. Her handle, coastline, hovered on the tip of her tongue, the instinct to key the mic strong. But she didn't quite reach for it. The voice had sounded oddly distant, like something on a recording rather than a live call. There had been a cadence to the speech she rarely heard anymore, a slightly old-fashioned drawl. The interstate curved gently to the right. Out of the thickening gray, another sign rose. This one was metal, standard issue green, lit from within so that it glowed like a softly opened door. Rest area 1-2 mile. No name, no gull emblem. That aligned more closely with what she knew. Still, there was the GPS, insisting on its 45-mile desert ahead. She watched the thin purple line on the screen. It did not bend, did not show a spur or a ramp. Her little blue triangle moved forward as if nothing existed between here and the truck stop far up the road. Ahead, the faint suggestion of an exit ramp materialized in her headlights, a darker shadow angling off from the main line, the reflective posts along its edge beating with mist. The idea of stopping, of being able to step down from the cab and stretch in the cool, salt-tinged air, suddenly felt not just appealing, but necessary. Her eyes had that slight burn of hours staring forward. Her shoulders held a quiet ache. She clicked on her blinker out of habit, though there were no headlights behind her to warn. The rhythmic tick filled the cab for a moment, strangely loud against the steady engine hum. The truck drifted smoothly into the right lane, then eased onto the ramp. The asphalt here felt subtly different under the tires, the texture changing from long-worn interstate to something a shade rougher, more granular. Her speed dropped, the sensation of forward rush softening. The fog seemed to lean in, curious. The ramp curved gently, first right, then left, then right again, more winding than most rest area approaches. Trees loomed on either side, their trunks mere smudges, their crowns lost in the white. Sodium vapor lights glowed somewhere ahead, their particular orange diffused into halos. As she approached, small details resolved themselves. A low stone wall, the outline of a picnic shelter, the vague bulk of another parked vehicle. The rest area opened around her like a small, self-contained world, cut off from the blankness of the highway. The lot was not empty. Shapes hunched beneath the fog, a boxy RV with rounded corners, a station wagon with a long hood and a roof rack, a sedan whose chrome bumpers caught her lights and flared dully. None of them had the sharp, angular profiles of modern vehicles. Their silhouettes whispered of another era. She guided her rig into a pull-through marked with white, slightly faded lines and brought it to a gentle stop. The air brake sighed. The engine ticked as it settled into idle. For a moment Maria sat still, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the way the space outside sounded, muted, softened. The fog seemed to swallow noise, leaving only the nearest sounds intact. Light from the overhead lamp seeped into the cab in pale orange strokes, painting the dashboard in a strange, nostalgic hue. She could see moisture gathering in tiny beads along the lower edge of the windshield, their surfaces trembling with the faint vibrations of the idling diesel. Her own reflection hovered in the glass, overlapping with the ghostly outlines of trees and parked cars. Dark hair pulled back, tired eyes, the curve of headphones resting around her neck. She killed the headlights but left the engine running. The darkness outside became less absolute, lit now only by the pool of orange from the lot and the dull gleam of a few smaller lights attached to the rest area building. That building sat at the center of the little complex, a low, wide structure with a peaked roof. It looked dated. The brickwork was darker than the new rest stops she knew. The windows had thick aluminum frames, some streaked with condensation on the inside. She checked her phone reflexively. No signal bars, not even the faint outline of a network name. Just a blank space where there was almost always something, even if not enough to stream. As she watched, the screen flickered once, as if considering showing her something, then settled back into its quiet refusal. On the bench beside her seat, the CB emitted a low, steady hiss. Underneath it, faint as a memory, she thought she heard music tinny, clipped, like an old song played through a cheap speaker. A few piano notes, a soft drum brush. Then only static again. Maria zipped her jacket and opened the door. Fog rolled in, cool and damp, brushing her face like the underside of a cold wave. The air smelled of wet asphalt, sea salt, and something older. The faint, stale aroma of coffee long ago spilled, of paper slowly yellowing, of old wood. The ground under her boots was slick with a thin sheen of moisture that made the gravel sparkle under the lamps. Sound here was an intimate thing. The reefer's hum seemed louder now, pressing at her back. Somewhere beyond the building, hidden in the trees, an unseen highway hissed faintly, a distant spool of tires on wet road. A few drops of condensed fog plinked softly off the metal of nearby picnic tables. She could hear, very far away and yet oddly close, the muted crashing of waves against rock. The rest area building's door was glass, set in a wide aluminum frame with a push bar across the middle. A faded decal in the corner showed a gull wheeling above stylized blue waves. Gull's head rest area, the words beneath it read, the paint cracked in fine spiderweb lines. She reached out. The metal bar was cooler than she expected, as if it had been in shadow all day. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed at a low, steady frequency. The tile floor was worn to a gentle shine in the paths where countless feet had passed. On one wall, a bank of vending machines stood shoulder to shoulder, one for drinks, one for snacks, one for coffee. Their plastic fronts were the slightly smoky, thick kind rarely used anymore. Behind them, the packages looked oddly vintage. The labels bore familiar brands, but with designs Maria hadn't seen outside of old photographs. Fonts thicker and rounder, colors muted, cartoon mascots smiling with a cheer that felt decades old. She stepped closer. A bag of chips caught her eye, the logo bright red against a sun-faded yellow. She read the tiny print beneath almost without intending to. Best Buy, May 1989. The numbers were clear, not smudged. The bag didn't look old or crinkled. It was plump with air, the seal unbroken. The contradiction made something in her chest tighten, not in fear, exactly. More in the way a person feels when they realize a song they've been humming doesn't actually exist. Her gaze slid to the drink machine. Inside, rows of soda cans sat poised behind their little spirals. Some wore brands that had disappeared from shelves before she was born. The prices printed beneath each selection window were startlingly low. Quarters, mostly. She lifted a finger to touch the glass. It was cool, but not cold. The hum of the refrigeration unit was very soft. Behind her, near the entrance to the restrooms, a corkboard hung crookedly on the wall. Yellowing flyers overlapped there, tourist brochures for nearby lighthouses, handwritten notices about lost dogs, tear-off tabs for small local services. A large printed map of the coastal interstate occupied the center, its paper slightly curled at the edges. Blue marker lines traced scenic routes. When she stepped closer, Maria saw that the highway on the map lacked the new bypass she knew she was currently driving, the stretch that cut around the older, smaller route. The lines simply didn't exist. Where her truck was would, on this map, still be a mostly two-lane road. From deeper inside the building where the restroom stood, she heard the faint echo of water running, as if someone had just turned off a faucet. Voices followed. A murmur, a low chuckle, the rustle of movement. She waited for someone to emerge, but no one did. The corridor remained empty, its fluorescent tubes humming, the tiles reflecting the light in pale, quiet stripes. The sense of being not entirely alone settled over her, oddly gentle. It wasn't the prickling awareness of being watched. It felt more like entering a library after hours and sensing the presence of everyone who had ever read there, their silence a kind of company. Maria crossed back to the vending machines and fed coins into the snack unit, more to test the solidity of the place than out of hunger. The machine accepted them with a sequence of mechanical clinks that sounded satisfyingly real. She punched the code for the bag of chips. The spiral turned, very slightly juddering, and the bag tumbled down into the tray. She bent, picked it up. It crinkled crisply under her fingers, not at all like something that had waited on a shelf for 3 decades. The printed expiration date on the back was the same, May 1989. Despite herself, she smiled, a small, startled thing. The world, for a heartbeat, felt like a stage set built from collective memory, everything slightly too on the nose to be real. On her way back out, she passed a row of pay phones along one wall. They had the sturdy, rectangular bodies of older models, their metal faces dulled by countless touches. A small printed instruction sheet was taped beneath one. Dial 0 for operator assistance. Beneath that, in smaller print, long-distance rates may vary. No one had written such instructions in years. One of the phone's handsets hung slightly askew, the cord coiled in lazy loops. Light from the parking lot poured in through the glass doors as she pushed them open again. Outside, the fog had shifted. It moved now in horizontal bands, layers of white-on white, through which the lamps cast their rounded cones. The parked vehicles lay half-wrapped in the mist. The RV's windows gleamed faintly. The station wagon's roof rack held what might have been an old cooler, its plastic faded. She saw no people. Walking back to her rig, the soft squelch of her boots on the damp asphalt sounded unusually loud, intimate. She had the sense that if she spoke aloud, her voice would feel intrusive, too sharp for this padded world. The air carried a slight chill that hadn't been there on the interstate, the kind that settled on skin and then disappeared, leaving only the memory. In the cab, the CB was still hissing softly. As she climbed up and settled into the driver's seat, a thread of sound emerged, a voice just strong enough to make words from. "Gulls heads open, boys. Good coffee tonight. Y'all run safe." The accent was warm, coastal, with a rhythm that felt borrowed from another decade. She reached for the microphone slowly, more as if not to disturb something fragile than out of fear. "Breaker, this is Coastline," she said. Her own voice sounded solid, grounding. "Anyone got a time check out there?" Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then, layered faintly behind the static, an answer came. 2:08 in the AM, far as she goes, a chuckle soft, same as always. She glanced at her dash clock. 2:36 AM, its blue digits declared, calm and uncompromising. For a moment, the numbers seemed to float, disconnected from meaning. Her hand loosened on the mic. The sense of wrongness was still there, but it had a peculiar gentleness, like a dream that knew it was a dream and meant no harm. "Copy," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure anyone would hear. "Appreciate it." The reply, if there was one, dissolved into static. Beneath it, very faint, she could hear music again. A tune carried by a saxophone, sweet and melancholy, the kind they played late in diners when most of the customers had gone. She set the mic back in its cradle. The bag of chips sat on the passenger seat where she dropped it, its bright colors incongruous in the muted light of the cab. She opened it, half expecting dust or nothing. The smell that rose was unmistakable, fresh, salty, a little oily, exactly as if it had been bagged that afternoon. She ate one. The crunch was immediate and perfect. Outside, the fog thickened for a moment, then began to thin, the lamps shrinking back into clearer circles. Something in her chest loosened when she saw that. The world beyond was returning, or perhaps she was returning to it. She checked her mirrors. though there was nothing to see but wavering white and the faint shapes of slumbering vehicles. Her hand went to the ignition key, more for assurance than necessity. The engine vibrated faithfully beneath her. With a small nod to no one, she eased the truck back into gear and rolled slowly toward the exit of the lot. The ramp back to the interstate rose gently, flanked by spectral trees that seemed to lean in and then drift away as she passed. For a moment at the top of the rise, the fog parted enough that she could glimpse what lay beyond. The dark hollow of the ocean, invisible but undeniably present, and the soft suggestion of white surf lines along the unseen shore. Then her rig merged onto the mainline again, and the familiar feel of the interstate returned, broader, smoother, arrowing forward through the night. The GPS blinked once, then updated. Next services, 27 miles. The little blue triangle had moved. Time ticked on, 2:44 a.m. She drove in silence for several minutes, letting the rhythm of the tires and the hum of the engine carry her. The fog here was less dense, breaking up into tatters that snagged on overpasses and fences. The sky above hinted at a color lighter than black, the first, almost imperceptible shift toward morning. A new sign rose from the roadside, catching her beams. Gull's Head Rest Area closed. The words were stamped on a plain metal panel, bolted beneath the standard green overhead marker. Yellow barricades stood across the entrance ramp, their reflective stripes faint but firm. Behind them, where the rest area lot should have been, she saw only darkness and the black suggestion of overgrown brush. The lamps were out. The building was a silhouette without features. For the time it took to pass the blocked ramp, the world seemed to narrow to the width of her windshield. Maria's hand tightened on the wheel. She looked once, quickly, at the passenger seat. The open bag of chips sat there, half-eaten, the expiration date on the back still reading May 1989. She thought of the humming lights, the older cars cloaked in fog, the vending machines and their forgotten brands, the voice on the CB speaking as if the year had never changed. A sense of calm stole over her, surprising in its depth. Whatever that place had been, memory, echo, dream, it had given her what all rest areas promised in their quiet way. A pause, a pocket of time to exhale. The CB crackled softly once more. In the rearview mirror, the barricaded entrance dwindled and vanished into the fog. "Run safe out there," a voice murmured, so faint she couldn't tell which direction it came from or how far away it was. She settled back into her seat, eyes on the ribbon of road unwinding ahead, the ocean an invisible companion on her right. The fog eased, gathering itself farther down the line. Ahead, somewhere beyond the curve of the earth, dawn was waiting. Story number 3. The plateau highway wound through the high country like a dark ribbon laid across the spine of the mountains, climbing and dipping in long, patient arcs. On clear days, the view from its overlook stretched for miles, layered ridgelines dissolving into blue haze, pine forests rippling like a sea. But tonight the world stopped just beyond the guardrail. Fog had come in early and thick, tumbling over the cliff edges and spilling across the asphalt in soft, rolling banks. Elias Mercer had been driving long enough to know the feel of a good road and the mood of a bad night. The road itself was fine, fresh pavement, solid shoulders, new reflective markers that caught his headlights and shot the light back at him in perfect white pinpricks. The night, though, was one of those quiet, watchful ones that made even familiar places seem a little less certain. In the cab of his Peterbilt, the climate control was set just right. The air smelled faintly of diesel, coffee, and the lingering ghosts of miles of truck-stop food. The dash lights glowed in their usual constellation, tack steady, coolant temp rock solid, a soft blue glow around the digital clock that now read 2:19 a.m. Out the windshield, the fog turned his high beams into walls of luminous white, dense enough that it appeared almost touched by substance. It churned lazily, a living thing, folding and unfolding in slow motion. He had meant to be on the main interstate, skimming along the valley floor where the fog would be lighter and the road straighter. An accident had closed down a long stretch, though, and his routing app had offered this alternative. A few extra miles, some elevation, nothing a seasoned driver couldn't handle. He'd run mountain passes in snowstorms and deserts in wind that lifted whole sheets of sand from the ground. Fog was more treacherous in its quiet way, but this was what he did. He moved freight through whatever the night put in his path. The trailer behind him was loaded with paper goods, light, forgiving cargo that didn't shove his rig around when he took the curves. The hum of the engine matched the slow, measured rise and fall of the grade. His hands rested easy on the wheel, knuckles pale only because of the glow from the dash. The radio was off. The CB, tuned to a common channel, whispered an occasional breath of static and little else. Outside, the world narrowed. The tall pines lining the highway were barely more than vertical smudges, their trunks swallowed at the top by white. The guardrail on his right appeared and vanished in sections, its galvanized surface sweating with beads of moisture that flared briefly as his lights passed. The painted center line was his truest guide, its dashes and reflectors emerging from the fog one by one like a string of breadcrumbs. He checked his mirrors out of habit. They showed almost nothing, just the faint, ghostly suggestion of his own trailer edges, and beyond them, a velvet darkness where no other headlights burned. The isolation was complete and, in its own way, comfortable. The long-haul life had taught him to find a strange sort of coziness in being the only island of light and motion in a sleeping landscape. A sign emerged from the fog on the right, sudden and startlingly close. He had barely a second to read it as it streaked through his beams. In memory of Jonah Keene. Mile 142. The letters were crisp, white against brown. Beneath them, a small metal silhouette of a semi-truck had been bolted to the post, no bigger than his hand. The fog leapt on it greedily as it passed, turning it into a dark blur. Roadside memorials dotted highways everywhere. They were small, solemn punctuation marks along the endless sentences of asphalt. Most of the time, Elias only half saw them. The quick flash of names, the impression of plastic flowers. This one had hit his gaze dead on, the name and mile marker lodging in his awareness like a pebble in a shoe. He drove on. The clock ticked over to 2:24. The fog thickened, then thinned, then thickened again, the rhythm slow as breathing. A curved sign appeared ahead, the arrow bending gently to the left. His hands shifted on the wheel. The truck leaned into the curve with a familiar, reassuring weight. The CB gave a brief pop, a surge of static, then quiet, then softly a voice. "Eastbound at 142, you got company tonight." The voice was male, mid-range, steady, not loud, not whispering. It had the unhurried cadence of someone who talked to keep themselves awake more than to truly converse. Elias glanced at the mic hanging from its clip. The channel light glowed its soft red, showing no sign of recent transmission, but the voice had been clear, as though the speaker were right beside him. He reached for the mic, thumb brushing the push-to-talk. "Westbound here," he said, rolling through the fog, not at 142 yet. His words sounded smaller in his ears than the stranger's had. The CB responded with a wash of white noise. No acknowledgement, no double click of a mic key, just the gentle hiss of distance. He set the mic back. Truckers talked in loops sometimes, rebroadcasting old chatter as jokes or to fill quiet air. Sometimes signals bounced in strange ways through these mountains. He had heard voices from states away ride the atmospheric conditions and land in his cab. The logical explanations stacked themselves neatly. Still, a thread of curiosity pulled through his calm. The next sign rose from the white a minute later, identical in shape and color to the first. In memory of Jonah Keene. Mile 142. He couldn't have missed a mile marker without noticing. The last reflective green blade he recalled had said 137. The grade, the curves, the big rock outcrop that loomed briefly to his left, they all aligned with where he believed himself to be. Yet here was this memorial, announcing mile 142 as if he had already arrived. The name repeated itself in his mind. Jonah Keene. It had a particularity that stuck. He watched the small metal truck silhouette glide past again, beads of moisture sparkling along its outline like dew. He reached for the GPS on its mount. Its map view showed the purple line of his route curling through the mountains, the little arrow of his truck inching forward. The digital mile counter in the bottom corner read 138.2. Everything fine. Everything normal. The fog rolled thicker now, a soft blanket drawn a little closer. The presence of the next curve was suggested only by a change in the slope of reflective posts ahead, bending in a smooth arc. He adjusted his speed, eyes flicking between road and dash. "Eastbound your common up on the marker now," the CB voice said, as if continuing a conversation Elias hadn't actually heard. "Fog sits heavy up there. Watch your right side." His left hand tightened on the wheel. The habit of conversation was strong, and an answer rose to his tongue. "You talking to me, driver, or to a ghost?" But he didn't press the mic. Some part of him wanted to hear the voice unprovoked, to see what it would say if left to its own script. He rounded the curve. The memorial appeared once more on the right, its brown rectangle steady in his lights. "In memory of Jonah Keene." Mile 142. Up close in the second or two before it vanished, he saw more this time. A small spray of plastic flowers wired to the post, their colors leached by weather. A ribbon curled around the base, once bright but now a pale, tired pink. A laminated photograph pinned under clear plastic. The fog in motion blurred the image, but he had an impression of a man in a baseball cap, the suggestion of a truck's grill behind him. The CB crackled, then steadied, the same voice again, a little softer. "Didn't see me common that night," it said. "Fog'll do that to you, makes the world small." Elias drew a slow breath, feeling the cool air from the vents touch the back of his throat. The practical part of his mind kept doing its work, eyes on the gauges, on the road edge, on the faint glow of the GPS. Another part listened, cataloged, began to arrange possibilities. A replay maybe. Some strange ham operator rebroadcasting a recording of an old conversation about a wreck. An eerie coincidence of names and mile markers. He had heard of optical illusions in fog, reflections, mirages. The stories truckers told each other in diners came back in fragments. Phantom hitchhikers vanishing from the passenger seat, ghostly convoys that appeared only in mirrors. The thing was, it didn't feel like a campfire story happening to someone else now. It felt intimately tailored to this stretch of night, to this very mile. Like a song he happened to know all the lyrics to, playing faintly from somewhere hidden. The road straightened, then sloped gently downhill. Pines crowded closer, their branches losing themselves in the white above. Occasionally their lower boughs scraped against the sound barrier fencing with a soft, dragging whisper. The fog seemed to glow on its own now, fed by the reflection of his lights and the hidden moon above, turning the air just beyond the glass into a luminous wall. His clock crept to 2:26. "Westbound at 142, you hearin' me?" the voice asked. There was no impatience in it, no urgency, just that steady, workmanlike tone of a driver using language the way others used coffee. They closed down the bridge past the mile. "You don't want to be up on it in this soup." "There's no bridge on this stretch," Elias said aloud, to himself more than to the radio. "Just the viaduct back at 131. The CB hissed softly, as if considering this. Then, almost companionably, "Might be a way it is now. Wasn't always. Lay your eyes on the next sign you'll see." He shook his head once, a tiny, private gesture that moved almost no muscles. The urge to pull over and reset his bearings tickled at him, but there was nowhere obvious to do it, no wide shoulder, no turnout, only the narrow seam of asphalt pressed between cliff and drop. The safest place for now was in motion. The next roadside element to emerge from the fog was a standard green marker, 139. A small sense of relief blossomed in his chest at the predictability of it. The numbers were doing what they were supposed to do again. Whatever kilometer of strangeness he'd passed through seemed, perhaps, to be behind him. Then, not 30 seconds later, in memory of Jonah Keene, mile 142. The memorial stood exactly as before, exactly where it could not be. This time, as it slid past, he glanced to the left, expecting some sign of trickery. Another parallel road, a double-posted marker, anything. There was only the slope of the land rising into white, the blurred verticals of trees. He exhaled slowly, a measured thing. Fear, that sharp, hot rush, never quite took hold. In its place came a peculiar clarity, a sense that reality had become more flexible than he'd given it credit for, but that he was still intact within it. His job remained simple: keep the truck between the lines, trust the feel of the wheel, move forward. The CB's speaker popped gently. "Bridge is out ahead, westbound," the voice said, conversational as before. "Can't see it till you're on top of it in this fog. Best not to run that risk." Elias tapped the brake gently, bleeding a little speed. "You talking about up here?" he asked at last, pressing the mic button. His thumb left a faint print of warmth on the plastic. "Mountain plateau, 2-lane, dense fog. That you, Jonah?" There was a pause on the line. The static seemed to draw in a breath of its own. Then the voice returned with the faintest hint of a smile in it. "Name on the sign, ain't it? Didn't think they'd spell it wrong." "Bridge isn't marked on my atlas," Elias said, "or the GPS. I've run this state for 15 years. Don't recall any bridge on this leg." Another pause, shaped like consideration. "Maps catch up slow sometimes," Jonah said. "Fog's quicker. You want to trust something tonight, I'd go with what you can feel in your hands and hear in your motor, not the little picture boxes." Ahead, the fog brightened slightly, as though reflecting an unseen source of light. For a moment, Elias thought he saw the vague suggestion of structure, a darker band across the white void, horizontal, maybe the line of a distant overpass. Then it dissolved, leaving only more swirling gray. The rational options were narrowing. He could slow to a crawl and inch forward, trusting only what his headlights revealed. He could stop altogether and wait for the world to rearrange itself. Or he could accept, at least provisionally, that something, or someone, had a better view of the road ahead than he did. "All right, Jonah," he said, surprising himself with the ease of the name. "What's your suggestion?" Static shivered, then cleared. "You'll see a service road on your right," the voice replied. "Little sign, nothing fancy, take it down, cuts around the drop. Old weight station down that way, quiet this time of night." "You're not showing up on my scanner," Elias said. He glanced at the CB's channel indicator. Everything looked normal. "Where you sitting right now?" "Let's just say I've been where you're going," Jonah answered. "And I ain't in a hurry to go there again. You got options I didn't. Might as well use them." The gentle certainty in the tone smoothed the edges of Elias' unease. Whether he was interacting with a lost signal from another time, a trick of mountain radio propagation, or some more inexplicable phenomenon, the advice was specific, practical, and, crucially, low risk. A service road detour was a minor inconvenience compared to whatever might, or might not, wait on a fogged-in bridge. He watched the right shoulder more carefully now. The fog lay thickest low to the ground, curling around the bases of the reflective posts. Then, out of that muted swirl, a small wooden sign emerged, its white paint faded to cream. "Wait Station Access Road, authorized vehicles only." An arrow pointed down a narrow spur of asphalt angling off from the main lane. The turn was sharper than most, nearly hidden until it was upon him, as if it waited until the last moment to decide whether to be real. He signaled out of habit. The blink of his trailer lights painted the fog behind him in soft, rhythmic amber. Then, with a smooth swing of the wheel, he guided the rig onto the access road. The sensation changed at once. The main highway's broad, confident shoulders gave way to something more intimate. Trees leaned closer, their trunks forming a loose colonnade. The pavement was older here, rougher, patched in places with darker rectangles. The grade dipped steadily, the gentle pull of gravity a constant hand at his back. The fog seemed less eager to cling to this road. It hung overhead in a thick ceiling, but nearer the ground it thinned into drifting tatters. He could see more than 20 yards ahead now, the curve of the lane outlined clearly. The hum of his engine echoed differently too, bouncing back from the close-set trees in a softer, rounder way. "Yeah, that's the one," Jonah's voice murmured, faint now, as if coming from a greater distance. "Wait stations down the hill, lots open. You can sit a spell, let the mess clear." "Appreciate the heads up," Elias said. He found that he meant it. The thought of a quiet, empty lot where he could park for a short while, step out into air that wasn't so saturated with the night's strangeness, had its appeal. The road curved left, then right, then opened suddenly onto a broad, flat space cut into the hillside, the wait station. It sat like a forgotten outpost from another era. The low, rectangular building wore weathered white paint, its windows dark. Overhead lamps on tall poles cast wide circles of pale yellow light, catching the moist air and turning it into faint halos. A long metal scale plate ran parallel to the building, its surface gleaming wet. The lot was empty. Elias rolled slowly across the near edge of the scale, feeling the change in texture through the seat as the truck's weight settled. The air here smelled different from the open road, less of pine and fog, more of old concrete, oil, and the faint tang of cold metal. He eased into a wide parking space alongside the scale, set the brake, and let the engine settle into idle. In the sudden stillness, the world outside the cab seemed even quieter than before. No other motors, no human voices, just the distant hush of the wind moving through treetops, and far above, the muffled swish of traffic on the main highway hidden by the slope and the fog. He turned the key partway, letting the engine die down. The silence flowed in, cool and soft. The dash lights glowed on. The CB hissed gently. The clock read 2:32 a.m. "Jonah," he said, lifting the mic again, "you still with me?" The speaker responded with a long, slow wash of static, the kind that felt almost like surf. Then, faint and far away, the voice once more. "Yeah, for a bit." A pause filled with the small sounds of electrons. "You did all right talking the turn. Some boys barrel on, you know, trust all the wrong things." Elias glanced through the windshield. The fog above the lot glowed under the lamps, layered like gauze. He could see the building's door plainly now, metal with a narrow window. A paper notice was taped crookedly to the inside. "You warn everybody that comes by?" he asked, "or just the late ones?" Another small, wry chuckle from the speaker. "Just the ones driven like I did. Alone, up high, thinking they know every bend. You start recognizing the look, even from the wrong side of time." The phrase settled in his thoughts, strange and oddly comforting. There was no chill, no sense of some spectral figure watching from the tree line. Only the slight ache in his shoulders, the familiar weight of fatigue that came with long nights and longer roads. He unbuckled his seat belt, the sound of the retracting strap loud in the quiet cab. "Gonna stretch my legs," he said into the mic. "If that bridge of yours comes back to life while I'm gone, don't let me miss it." "You'll hear it," Jonah replied. "One way or another, night only bends so far." Elias smiled, a brief expression that moved his face without quite reaching his eyes. He set the mic down and opened the door. The air that met him was cool and damp, smelling of wet cement and pine needles. The fog overhead formed a luminous ceiling that reflected the lot lights back down in a muted, even glow. The ground beneath his boots was slick but solid, the fine grit of sand scattered here and there adding texture. He walked across the lot toward the wait station building. His footsteps sounded muffled, as if he were walking on a thick rug instead of concrete. Up close, the structure looked even older. The paint peeled in thin curls at the corners. A metal sign near the door, its letters dim under oxidized varnish, read, "State Wait Station. HOURS, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. closed until further notice. A thin layer of frost had formed in the upper corners of the sign, catching the light in delicate crystals. The paper notice in the window was yellowed, its ink blurred in places by moisture. He could just make out the date printed at the top. It was more than a decade old. He peered inside. The interior was a dim puzzle of empty chairs, a desk with a computer monitor the size and shape of machines that had long since been replaced, a coffee pot on a hot plate. A calendar clung to the far wall, its pages frozen on a month that did not match the one his phone knew. No movement, no recent footprints in the thin film of moisture on the threshold. Yet the lamps burned clear and steady, casting their light out into the fog as if expecting someone to see it. He stood there for a moment, listening to the layered silences, the near quiet of the empty lot, the farther hush of high fog and distant highway, the faint, steady tick of his truck's cooling engine. A sense of peculiar peace crept in around the edges of his awareness. Whatever strangeness threaded this place, it was not sharp or predatory. It felt resigned, watchful in a gentle way. Back in the cab, the CB gave one last brief stir. "Road'll settle some westbound," Jonah's voice said, softer now, fraying at the edges. "When you head back up, stick to the main. Bridge'll be there or it won't. Either way, you'll make your miles." Elias climbed up, pulling the door closed behind him with a solid thunk. He sat for a moment with his hands resting on his knees, feeling the faint vibration of the idling reefer through the seat. The fog beyond the glass shifted, affectionate and slow. "Appreciate the assist," he said into the mic, the habit of courtesy ingrained deeper than any apprehension. "Hope you're running, easier these days, wherever you're sitting." A small pause, then a click that sounded almost like a nod. "Lighter load now," Jonah replied. "Keep between the lines, driver. That's all any of us ever really did." The static thickened and thinned, then settled into a simple, even hiss. No matter how long Elias listened, no further words came. He turned the key, feeling the engine respond with familiar strength. Gauges rose to where they should be. Lights glowed their steady colors. The cab felt like what it had always been, a small, contained universe moving through a larger, more uncertain one. When he eased back up the service road and rejoined the highway, the fog had shifted. It still hung heavy over the plateau, but it had pulled back just enough that he could see the stripes, the guardrail, the faint outline of a bridge up ahead that his memory couldn't quite account for. As he rolled toward it, the structure resolved. A modest span across a deep ravine, its railings beaded with moisture, its deck slick but intact. He crossed it at a careful, moderate speed, feeling the faint change in vibration under his wheels. On the far side, Mile 142's green marker stood, blank and official. Beside it, the memorial appeared one last time in his beams, the name and small metal truck silhouette as steady and real as anything else on that road. "In memory of Jonah Keene." Mile 142. Elias dipped his head, just enough that his chin brushed his chest. Then the sign slipped back into the fog, the plateau highway unwound ahead, and the night returned to its usual dimensions. The CB hissed quietly. The engine hummed. The world beyond the glass remained mysterious, but his path through it was simple, measured in miles and marked by lines of light. He drove on, into a darkness that felt, somehow, a little less empty than before. Story number 4. By just after midnight, the river valley had folded in on itself, all its wide open fields and distant farm lights erased under a blanket of fog that lay low and thick as wool. The interstate that followed the water's slow curve had the feel of a long, dim hallway with no visible end. Headlights reached out only a short distance before dissolving into a whiteness that seemed to glow from within. Guardrails, overpasses, and mile markers emerged suddenly and vanished just as quickly, like thoughts that refused to linger. In the cab of the old Kenworth, the world felt smaller and far more certain. The heater hummed quietly, breathing warm air across the floorboards. The dashboard instruments glowed in steady amber and green arcs, a familiar night sky of gauges. Oil pressure solid, RPM settled, fuel sitting just above half. The digital clock on the radio read 12:07 a.m. in a calm, indifferent blue. Curtis Lane rolled north with one hand resting light on the wheel and the other wrapped around an insulated mug that smelled faintly of strong, slightly burnt coffee. He had run this route along the river for more than a decade, ferrying pallets of canned goods and packaged staples between distribution centers. He knew its curves and climbs in all kinds of weather, from snow squalls to glare-bright summer heat. Tonight's fog was thick even by river standards, a damp, clinging presence that pressed against the windows and softened every sound, but the pavement itself rode smooth and steady under his tires. The only music came from the engine's low growl and the distant hiss of rubber on wet asphalt. The radio had fallen into static half an hour back, the usual late-night talk show dissolving into a soft, shivery nothing. The CB was quiet too, an occasional crackle hinting at someone talking just out of range, but no words strong enough to catch. Outside, the night smelled of wet earth and distant water. With the driver's side vent cracked an inch, cool air slipped in carrying the mineral scent of the river, the faint tang of damp leaves, and the ghost of wood smoke from some unseen farmhouse. Moisture beaded on the mirrors and traced slow, meandering paths across the side windows. The long straightaway he was on now usually offered a view of the dark river to the right, its surface sometimes glinting under a low moon, barges moving like sluggish shadows. Tonight there was only fog, thick enough that it felt as if he were driving through the inside of a cloud. The reflective lane markers on the pavement shone up at him in crisp white dashes, each one a brief, reassuring flare. He passed a large green exit sign, shouldering up out of the white. Arrive Airbnb 2 miles. The letters leapt at him, then slipped away. He pictured the gentle curve of the off-ramp, the gas station that sat just beyond it, the small town tucked along the water. Somewhere behind that fog, people were asleep in houses with warm yellow kitchen lights they hadn't bothered to turn off. He imagined it the way one might imagine a radio show still playing, even after the knob had been turned. The next sign he saw was different. It rose first as a vague, darker shape, then gathered detail as his headlights washed over it. Huge orange arrows marched across a rectangular board, their shafts made of long, narrow bulbs that glowed a deep, insistent amber. The arrows pointed left, flashing in a slow, steady rhythm, on, off, on, off. Underneath, in reflective black letters on a temporary-looking panel, detour right lane. Prepare to exit. Curtis straightened in his seat slightly, instinctively easing off the throttle. Detours along this stretch weren't common. Road work tended to happen in the summer when the nights were short and dry. Still, it wasn't impossible. Maybe a rock slide, maybe a jackknifed rig up ahead. The fog made everything more uncertain, and detours were, occasionally, a necessary kind of disruption. He checked his mirrors, though he already knew what he'd see. A gray wash of nothing, his own trailer's faint outline disappearing not far behind the cab. No headlights followed. The interstate, for now, was his alone. The aero board's orange light flickered against the fog, making the world on that side of the highway pulse gently. He signaled and eased into the right lane, feeling the truck respond with its usual, unhurried grace. Beneath the aero board, plastic barrels stood like mute sentries, their white reflective bands glowing as he passed. A second sign appeared 100 yards later, its letters crisp in his beams. Right lane closed 1 mile. Truck detour, exit 37A. He frowned slightly, not in alarm yet, but in a kind of private puzzlement. Exit 37A was not, to his recollection, a truck route. It led to an older 2-lane road that ran closer to the river, winding through low-lying marsh and patches of woodland. Weight-limited bridges, sharp 90-degree turns through crossroads towns. He had taken it once years ago in a 4-wheeler out of curiosity, but never in the Kenworth. Things change, he reminded himself. Roads get reinforced, routes get redesigned, maps get updated. The air smelled a little more metallic now, the fog carrying a tang of cold steel and damp concrete that suggested unseen construction. He glanced at the GPS mounted on the dash. Its small, backlit display showed a simplified version of the interstate's curve along the river. His little truck icon tracked neatly along the purple route line. No detour overlay, no flashing indicators. The next instruction bar at the top read, "Continue 61 miles on I-27N." Curtis tapped the side of the unit with his knuckle, more out of habit than any real hope it needed adjusting. The purple line stayed put. The diesel hummed. Outside, the fog pressed close and thick. The third sign came up quickly. "Truck detour, exit 37A. All rigs must exit." The word "must" sat there in reflective white, small but insistent. To the right through the fog, the faint ghost of an overhead sign loomed. 37A, its green surface dulled by moisture, the number shining out regardless. A row of marker lights on the ramp edge glowed softly. He imagined cruising past, staying on the main line as his GPS wanted, trusting blind faith in the digital over the physical. It wasn't a thought that sat easily. He had seen what doing that could lead to. Rigs wedged under too low bridges, trailers sunk to their axles on weight-limited country lanes. The aero board's steady, measured flash flickered through the side window like a heartbeat. Curtis flipped on his blinker. The tick-tick-tick filled the cab, steady and comforting. He guided the Kenworth onto the exit ramp at a reduced, quiet speed, feeling the gentle slope lead him down and away from the invisible river of interstate traffic. The sensation was like stepping into a side room in a familiar house and finding it furnished differently than he remembered. The ramp curved to the right, hugging an embankment that rose up and vanished into the fog. The sound of his tires changed slightly, the tone of water on pavement shifting as the drainage pattern altered. He saw the wide, open-mouthed on-ramp to the older state route ahead, flanked by temporary-looking signs. "Truck detour, follow ARROWS. Local traffic, use caution." Beyond them, the two-lane road spread out, one narrow strip of dark asphalt in either direction, faint yellow centerline barely visible under the sheen of moisture. The surrounding landscape was only a suggestion, silhouettes of low trees hunched close to the road, a vague openness where he knew the river's wetlands stretched out. He eased onto the state road, half expecting to feel the pitch and roll of something rougher under his tires. Instead, the surface rode oddly smooth, almost new, as if it had been laid last week. The truck settled onto it like a boat gliding onto still water. The fog remained, but its texture shifted. It felt less like a wall and more like a living curtain that moved as he did. The detour signs kept appearing with comforting regularity, small. Diamond-shaped markers with thick black arrows pointed ahead, their reflective surfaces flaring briefly as he approached and then dimming as he passed. No other vehicles moved on the road. No opposing headlights pierced the white. Silence pressed around the cab more thickly here. The distant hiss of interstate traffic had faded entirely, leaving only the engine's steady rumble and the low, rhythmic thumps of expansion joints beneath his wheels. The air, funneled in from the cracked vent, was cooler, flavored now with the damp, slightly sweet scent of marsh grasses and river mud. Curtis adjusted his hands on the wheel, feeling the faint texture of worn leather under his palms. His eyes tracked the faint yellow line, the ghostly posts at the shoulders, the next arrow sign. The road dipped gently, then rose, barely perceptible changes that his body registered more than his mind. The GPS still showed him on the interstate. His little truck icon cruised straight and true along the purple ribbon, tracking a road he was no longer physically on. No jag of protest, no satellite error warning. It was as though the device had chosen a reality and decided to commit to it, regardless of where his headlights actually shone. He reached over and turned the unit off. The screen went black, leaving the cab lit only by the warmer glow of analog gauges and the faint spill of light from the dome lamp over the bunk. Outside, the fog absorbed everything else, leaving him in a cocoon of dimness washed by the occasional flash of arrow reflections. The CB, long silent, stirred. "Copy all detour traffic," a voice said, thin and distant as though traveling a very long way. "Keep them doubles tight, boys. Watch your spacing in the soup." The accent was familiar country highway, the kind Curtis heard in truck stops from Tennessee to Oklahoma. Not any one place, but all of them mixed by mileage. There was a hint of laughter in the words, the easy camaraderie of night drivers sharing a necessary annoyance. Curtis lifted the mic. "This northbound on the river detour," he said, keeping his tone casual. "You boys seein' this fog like I am, thick as a milkshake out here?" There was a short crackle, then a burst of overlapping voices, all too muddled to decipher. It sounded like half a dozen people talking over each other on the same channel. For a heartbeat among the noise, he thought he heard the echo of an older truck brand name, one he hadn't seen on the road in years. Then silence again, as complete and padded as the fog. He drove on. The detour signs never failed him. They appeared like waypoints in a dream, always just where they needed to be, their arrows unwavering. Time slipped in the soft interior of the cab. The next time he remembered looking at the clock, it read 12:24 a.m. He had the faint, peculiar feeling that it had read 12:24 once already somewhere back along the river before he took the exit. On his right, beyond the hazy reach of his headlights, a different kind of light appeared at last, a cluster of red and amber. Points diffused through the fog, tail lights. The sense of relief that rose in him was quiet but deep. Company. Confirmation that this was not some private, solitary detour designed only for his rig. He closed the distance cautiously. The shape of another semi began to emerge. Squared-off trailer, reflectors along the side stripes blinking to life as his light fell on them. The rig ran at a steady 45. Its brake lights occasionally flaring just enough to suggest a slight adjustment rather than any real slowing. He eased back to match its pace, leaving a jogger's distance of road between them. The other truck's trailer doors were painted white, but the logo stenciled there in red and blue looked softly wrong. The font was familiar in the way an old photograph is familiar, an earlier version of a brand name he knew well now in sharper, more modern lines. The cab pulling the trailer had squarer shoulders than his Kenworth, its roofline lower, its running lights arranged in a pattern he hadn't seen in years. The license plate on the back bumper was the right color for the state they were in, but the design was older. No website URL along the bottom edge, no newer security strip. He watched the other truck's marker lights wink on and off in the mist. Its exhaust plumed out behind it in brief, soft puffs that merged instantly with the fog. No driver's name or cheeky slogan on the mud flaps. No company website or QR code on the trailer. Just a name he knew existed once, and had since been bought, merged, and painted over by something bigger. The CB crackled again. "Copy lead unit, we got at least 6 behind you," a different voice said, clearer now, tinged with fatigue. "Fog ain't jivin' us much here. You still see that wrecker up ahead?" "Barely a glow in the soup," another replied, dry. "Just keep your nose on my tail lights. They'll sort it when we hit the clearing." Curtis thumbed his mic without really thinking. "What clearing you boys aiming for?" he asked. "I'll gladly follow you into better air." Silence met his words. The truck ahead neither slowed nor sped up. Its tail lights burned a soft, unwavering red. He could almost believe he heard other engines now, phantom hums somewhere just beyond his mirrors, but the fog blurred distance and direction. The road, narrow and slick, encouraged attention on the here and now. On his dash, the clock nudged over to 12:27 a.m. The road began a gentle climb. Pines, or perhaps some other tall, narrow trees, appeared on either side, their trunks like dim vertical bars, their tops swallowed by white. The air felt slightly colder, seeping through the cab's seams and brushing his cheeks. The smell of marsh faded, replaced by the cleaner, sharper scent of high ground and wet stone. The sense of following grew stronger. He matched the lead truck's every move, its small corrections on curves, its adjustments to grade. A strange comfort stole over him, the old human ease of being part of a line of travelers rather than a single point of light in an endless dark. Yet each time he glanced in the mirrors, he saw only his own trailer and a vast, unmarked whiteness behind it. No other headlamps, no chain of vehicles stacked up back there. The voices on the CB continued their low conversation regardless, commenting on tight turns and bad visibility, as if narrating a scene he could not fully see. Somewhere ahead, faint and far off, an amber glow began to gather in the fog, distinct from the way his headlights reflected back. It pulsed, hazy and rounded, like the distant promise of a truck stop's canopy lights. The lead truck's brake lights brightened slightly, then stayed on, a sign of controlled slowing. Curtis felt his own rig begin to decelerate, his foot easing down with practiced care. The road leveled. The glow ahead resolved into something more structured. Vertical poles, the faint horizontal slash of signs, shapes that might be parked trailers. An overhead gantry loomed out of the white, straddling the roadway. Mounted beneath it, old-style light bars bathed the fog in a warm, diffuse amber. A sign hung from the metal crossbeam. Weigh and inspection. Truck detour all rigs. The font was blocky, the reflective coating scuffed. It looked like something from a photograph in a book about highway history. The lot beyond, what he could see of it, appeared wide, with multiple lanes funneling toward an open-scale house. He watched the lead truck signal and drift into the rightmost lane. Without thinking, he mirrored the movement. Painted lines, a little faded but still legible, guided them forward. The fog here twisted in slow eddies under the overhead lights, their orange halos turning every droplet into a tiny, floating ember. The scale itself, when he reached it, was a long metal plate sunk into the pavement, old-fashioned with raised seams and a weathered surface. A light over the adjacent window in the scale house glowed yellow. Behind the glass, silhouetted by interior fluorescent strips, a figure moved. The lead truck rolled across and came to a stop, trailer centered on the plate. Curtis held back, brakes feathered, keeping his Kenworth just clear. Through the mist, he could see the outline of the other driver's cab door. It never opened. No one stepped down. In the scale house window, the figure leaned forward, as if studying a monitor. Its shoulders were hunched, the shape suggesting a man in a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Light glinted briefly off what might have been a pair of glasses. The CB crackled. "Lead unit, your gross is still too heavy on that rear axle," the scale house voice announced, its tone businesslike but tired. "You're not cleared. Back it off to the shoulder. We'll see what the wrecker says when he gets here." "Copy that," another voice replied, one Curtis hadn't heard yet, younger, sounding both frustrated and resigned. "Didn't see the slick till I was on it." A soft chill bloomed in Curtis's stomach. Not fear, exactly. More like the sensation of standing in a room and realizing the painting on the wall is the same one that hung in your grandparents' house decades ago, unchanged by time. The lead truck's engine revved gently. Its brake lights flared, then dimmed as it rolled forward and off the scale, angling toward a shadowy space to the side. Fog swallowed its trailer in stages. First the doors, then the marker lights, then the vague rectangle of its shape. For a breath, the place it had occupied looked darker than the surrounding air, as though the night were remembering it. The scale house window light flickered once, then steadied. The figure inside turned its head slightly, toward where Curtis's cab now idled. He waited for the wave of a hand, the gesture to pull forward. None came. The window's glass shone dull gold, the silhouette behind it motionless. The fog pressed gently against the panes like curious hands. His clock still read 12:27 a.m. He realized, in a small, quiet way, that it had been 12:27 for as long as he could remember since leaving the main interstate. Curtis set the parking brake, the air hiss a sharp punctuation in the stillness. His hand hovered over the door latch but didn't pull. The warmth of the cab felt suddenly more precious, its small, contained air scented with familiar things: coffee, oil, the faint detergent of the bunk's sheet. He picked up the CB mic instead. "Scale House, you want this northbound on the plate?" he asked, voice steady. "Detour traffic off 37A. The speaker replied with a soft buzz, then the same Scale House tone he'd heard addressing the lead unit. "All detour traffic hold position," it said. "We're still working the scene up ahead. Fog's not helping us any. Stay put till the wrecker gives the all clear." Up ahead, through the glow and white, there was no visible scene. No blue or red strobes, no flares, no bent guardrails. Just the vague suggestion of a road continuing into brightness and then back into fog beyond. He glanced in his side mirror. The lot behind him was empty. No other rigs had lined up. No diesel exhaust hung in the air except his own. The thought came to him, gentle and undeniable. Whatever scene they were talking about, it was not tonight. He could sit. He could wait in this pocket of time, in this old detour that had forgotten to close. The idea was not frightening. If anything, it was oddly restful. The fog wrapped the Scale House and the vacant lot in a soft, enclosing patience. The figure in the window remained still, the lamp behind it a small sun in its own tiny universe. Curtis thumbed the mic again. "Understood," he said. "I'll hold right here. You boys be careful up there." A pause, then in that same work-worn tone, "We'll do what we can. Appreciate you 102's talking the detour. Makes it easier for everybody." The phrase 102's nudged at his memory. An old code, one he hadn't heard in years, from before the company switched to new jargon. It hung in the air between him and the speaker, then drifted away like breath on glass. He sat for what could have been 5 minutes or 50. The clock did not move. The fog did. It thickened, thinned, swirling in lazy currents he could almost convince himself followed some pattern. The Scale House lamp burned on. Once, he saw the silhouette inside lift an arm as if jotting something down. No one ever opened the door. At last, with a slowness that felt like waking from a deep, strange sleep, he reached for the ignition and turned it fully off. The engine's rumble died, leaving a profound quiet that rang in his ears. The reefer unit at the back of the trailer clicked into its own soft cycle, a distant reassurance that his cargo remained what it had always been: boxes and cans on pallets, obeying the normal laws of weight and temperature. In that deeper silence, he heard something new, not from the CB or the road. From somewhere overhead, muffled by fog and distance, the faint hiss of cars on a much busier stretch of road than this detour could ever be. The true interstate, running parallel in another layer of the night. A calm certainty settled in him, simple as breath. He turned the key again. The Kenworth's engine came back to life, its vibration traveling up through the floor and into his feet. Gauges rose. Lights glowed. The clock blinked once and decided without fanfare that it was now 12:39 a.m. Outside, the Scale House window seemed a little dimmer. The silhouette within had drifted farther from the glass, or perhaps it had never been as solid as he imagined. The fog between him and the building felt thicker, something that would happily take back whatever little details it had allowed him. Curtis released the parking brake. "Northbound detour, gonna roll," he said into the mic, not expecting an answer and not needing one. "Thanks for the guidance." Static whispered back, steady and indifferent. He eased the truck forward, steering off the old scale lane and back onto what felt like the main thread of the detour road. The overhead amber lights fell behind him. Trees moved in again, their trunks lining the roadside like patient guardians. The fog closed ranks. A quarter mile later, without warning, reflective signs snapped into being on either side of the road. End detour. Resume normal traffic. Beyond them, as if he had crossed some invisible seam, the fog pulled back. Not all at once, but gradually, like a curtain being drawn open. The air ahead was still hazy, but he could see the dark ribbon of a multi-lane highway emerging, its overhead lights throwing clean, bright pools on the concrete. He rolled onto the merged lane of I-27 without needing to turn the wheel much at all. The pavement widened smoothly under his tires. Lane markers multiplied. A car passed in the left lane, its taillights crisp and solid. Overhead, a modern green sign glowed. Exit 38, RIVERBEND, 1 mile. He glanced at the GPS screen, which he hadn't switched back on. It flared to life on its own, logo flashing, then sprang into its map view. His little truck icon realigned with the purple line as though it had never strayed. The CB remained softly quiet. Curtis Lane settled his hands more firmly on the wheel and let the Kenworth stretch its legs a little, easing back up to cruise speed. The night around him felt different now, less intimate, more ordinary. The river's scent drifted in again, joined by the faint aroma of hot brakes from some unseen rig ahead. In his side mirror, where only fog had lived before, the highway's gentle curve receded under a sky just beginning to hint at stars. No trace of the old state road showed. No scale house lights glowed in the distance. Only the steady, unbroken procession of modern overhead lamps and reflective guardrails followed the river north. He drove on, the tires singing their familiar hymn against the pavement, the heater breathing soft warmth across the floor. Whatever piece of the roads past he had skirted, it did not reach for him. It lay back there in the fog, in a pocket of time that would open for whomever it was meant to, and close just as gently when it was done. Story number 5. The causeway lifted the highway out over the marsh like a concrete thread, long and narrow, and without a single true shoulder, stretching between two dark pieces of land that might as well have been continents. On maps it showed as a fine gray line across a blue-green patch labeled with the name of the bay, 20 miles of elevated roadway supported by a forest of pilings driven deep into mud and water. By 3 in the morning, it felt less like a piece of engineering and more like something improbable. A ribbon of asphalt hung between sky and water, carried forward only because enough people believed it existed. Delaney guided her rig out onto it with the quiet focus of someone who understood exactly what 20 miles with no easy pull-off meant. The sign just before the bridge had reminded her anyway, in big reflective letters. No shoulder next 20 miles. The letters had flashed up briefly in her headlights, then dropped away behind, taking the last of the solid ground with them. The night air changed as soon as the cab nose glided past the first set of pilings. It cooled, picking up the faint briny tang of the bay and a colder, metal-edged scent of open water. With the vent cracked an inch, that new air slipped into the cab in careful drafts, brushing her cheek, curling through the warm, diesel-scented interior. The fog met her halfway. It came in low from the water's skin, rising in milk-colored layers that the truck's high beams turned into walls. One moment she could see 100 yards of lane marker ahead. The next it was compressed to 30, then 20. The concrete guardrails on either side, usually reassuring in their solid gray massiveness, now looked like soft ghost edges, their tops blurred, their bases lost in the rolling white. She clicked off the high beams, shifting to low. The effect was immediate. The glare that had turned the fog into a luminous curtain faded, replaced by a softer gray-on-gray tunnel. The lane lines, thick and bright where fresh reflective paint had been laid down, resolved themselves more clearly. The polished tops of the guardrails caught enough light to define the road's edges. The world shrank, but it sharpened. In the cab, the dash's gentle glow seemed warmer by contrast. Gauges arced in greens and ambers. Air tanks full, oil pressure solid, coolant sitting exactly where it should. The digital clock in the center stack read 3:02 a.m. in calm blue numerals. Beside it, taped to the faux wood panel, me small analog dash clock, round face, black hands, pointed to 2:48. She frowned just a little. The analog ran a few minutes slow sometimes. She'd been meaning to adjust it. Tonight, the gap looked wider, as if one of the clocks had skipped or lingered. She decided to trust the digital just this once and let the thought drift away. Her truck's engine hummed a steady tenor beneath her feet. The trailer behind her carried refrigerated produce, boxed greens, berries, fruit. The reefer unit added its own soft, cycling purr, a high backdrop to the lower diesel note. The combined sounds were oddly soothing, a two-part lullaby that had carried her through more late nights than she could count. She was alone on the bridge as far as she could tell. No taillights ahead, no approaching headlights. Behind her, in the mirrors, only a smudged whiteness reflected back, the fog swallowing her running lights almost as soon as they left the rear of the trailer. The causeway's emergency phones, posted at intervals, were invisible in the murk, their pale call boxes erased by distance and density. The radio had given up a few miles back, the FM station crackling itself into a thin, formless hiss under the onslaught of moisture and distance. She twisted the knob absently, more habit than intent, watching the green frequency digits slide past. Nothing but static and the occasional distant pop responded. On the far right of the band, an AM frequency snagged her attention. Amid the hiss, something pulsed, a low, steady tone, not quite musical, not quite mechanical. She paused her hand, narrowed her eyes. The tone thickened, resolved. A voice swam up out of the static like a shape coming up from deep water. And now, continuing live coverage of the situation on the Bay Bridge. The voice was a man's, mid-range, smoothed by the practiced cadence of someone who had spent years behind a microphone. It had a faint metallic edge, like an older recording. Me blinked. She hadn't heard anyone refer to this causeway as the Bay Bridge in years. The official name had changed when the last expansion added the third lane. Now it was a memorial causeway with a politician's name attached. Old habits died hard on local tongues, though. A radio host clinging to the earlier term wasn't impossible. Static rushed in for a breath, then receded again. Authorities are urging motorists to stay off the span if at all possible, the voice continued, a little breathless now. Reports of a major pileup just past mile 11, dense fog, multiple vehicles involved. The tone of the voice and the content of the words pushed a prickling line of awareness up the back of her neck. Her gaze flicked to the right, searching out the small, green reflective mile marker on the guardrail. The last one she had passed had read 3. She hadn't seen 4 yet. Mile 11 was still a long way ahead. She reached toward the radio dial, meaning to adjust the volume, maybe find the current emergency broadcast if this was a rebroadcast. As her fingers brushed the knob, static surged, swallowing the voice entirely. No matter how she turned it, left, right, slow, fast, she caught only faint fragments. Fog advisories. Visibility less than, troopers closing, then nothing. Only the soft, sea-like shush. She left the volume low and her hand returned to the wheel. The bridge rose in a subtle, long incline, its grade almost imperceptible but noticeable in the way the engine's note shifted slightly higher. The fog responded by thickening, as if more eager to wrap itself around the higher sections. It muted the world to the essentials, the dash lights, the hood's faint outline, the 2 ghostly guardrails, and a short stretch of damp concrete ahead. Her CB radio, which had been silent for most of the night, popped once. A crisp snap, as if someone had briefly keyed up and then let go. She waited, ears pricked. After a moment, a voice slid into the cab, pressed into being by the small speaker. Northbound on the causeway, you got your ears on. It was not the polished announcer voice from the AM frequency. This one was rougher, more textured, a working voice wearing late-night fatigue like a jacket. The accent was local Bay country, consonants softened, vowels drawn out just enough. Me glanced at the handset hanging from its clip. Channel 19's tiny red indicator glowed steady. The old, ingrained etiquette of the road nudged her thumb forward. She wrapped her fingers around the mic and brought it closer. "Got you, driver," she said. "Northbound reefer about 3 miles on the span. You talking to me?" There was a small pause, filled only by the quiet hiss of the band. "Copy that," the voice came back. "You'll be comin' into the thick of it soon. Fog's sittin' hard over the middle miles tonight." "Feels like it's sittin' pretty hard here," she answered, keeping her tone easy. "Didn't catch any signs about closures back on land." Another pause, a soft crackle. "Signs don't always catch up," the driver said. "My handle's harbor light. This your first run across since the air turned." Me smiled despite the oddness of the question. "Hardly. Run this causeway twice a week minimum. Name's Foxglove on the air." "Good handle for a night like this," Harbor Light said. There was a hint of a grin in the words, gentle and tired. "Listen, Foxglove, you pay attention around mile 11. Lot of folks don't, and they don't all make it off the deck." The phrasing was casual. The content was not. She shifted her grip on the mic. "You talking about that pileup the radio was going on about?" she asked. "Sounded like they had a mess on their hands." Silence greeted her, then something stranger. Soft, overlapping murmurs, as if several voices were speaking at once on the same channel, all too faint to separate into words. The noise rose, receded, left only Harbor Light again. "Radio?" he asked. "Haven't had much luck with mine since they pulled the plug on the tower. You picking up something live?" Me's eyes slid back to the digital clock. 3:08 a.m. The analog still sat stubbornly at 2:50. The hands hadn't moved. "Some AM chatter," she replied. "Could be a rebroadcast from years ago for all I know, talking about a big wreck in fog. Mile 11. Sounded pretty bad." "That track," Harbor Light said quietly. "Fog comes in thick enough over the water, time gets sticky out here. Stories hang around. You just let me talk you through the bad patch, all right?" She wanted to ask a dozen questions. Where he was on the span, whether he could see her lights, why his voice carried that particular, almost wary softness. Instead she said, 10-4, because sometimes the old phrases held all the right shapes, even when nothing that filled them made perfect sense. The road leveled a little. Somewhere below, invisible under the fog and darkness, the water widened, the marsh giving way to open bay. The concrete barrier on her right felt lower, more like a suggestion than a wall. She kept her hands steady, eyes moving in their practiced scan. Lane line, guardrail, gauge, mirror, and back again. Green flickered on the right, a mile marker. For an instant, the numerals flashed up clear, 7. 4 miles, Harbor Light noted, as if reading the same sign. "You're gonna feel like you're alone out there. That's a trick. You're not. Folks ahead, folks behind, all ridden the same piece of concrete. You just can't see 'em yet." "I've been alone on worse," Me said, the small comfort of conversation threading through her. "Snow on mountain passes, crosswinds in the plains. Fog's just its own kind of quiet." "Quiet's not the problem," the driver replied. "It's what rolls around in it. You buckle up, Foxglove." She glanced down automatically at the strap across her chest and shoulder. "Affirmative." "Good, should have done that myself back when," Harbor Light said. The way he said it made it sound like a completed sentence, even though it was. "All right. Somewhere up ahead you're gonna see brake lights you don't trust. When you do, you ease off and let 'em go. Don't ride up on 'em. Don't try to be the one that sees more than they do." She opened her mouth to ask what that meant. Ahead. In the low gray tunnel of her low beams, a red flicker appeared, then resolved into steady twin points. Tail lights. Farther than they looked, closer than they felt. A car by the height and spacing. Maybe an SUV in the same lane, moving just a hair slower than she was. The timeliness of the appearance made some small tightness wind through her middle. "Like that?" she asked softly into the mic. There was no crackle this time, only an immediate, calm answer. "Exactly like that," Harbor Light said. "Give 'em room." She dropped her speed gently. no sudden changes that might startle whoever was ahead. The distance between them grew to a comfortable, safe stretch, more than enough to stop, enough that their lights were a presence, not a pressing claim on her attention. The fog around the car's tail lights made them bloom, their red circles diffusing into soft halos. For a moment the whole rear of the vehicle looked blurred, its edges uncertain. Then it sharpened again, condensed into a recognizable shape. A boxy profile, squared off corners, older model. The license plate, when the light caught it just right, flashed a design she hadn't seen in years. Simple blue letters, no holographic band. Her mind caught at details the way it always did. The old plate style, the absence of a high-mounted third brake light, the slight wobble of the car's path. Someone with an older vehicle with tired shocks, she thought. Nothing extraordinary. Except the radio. Fog-related collisions continue to snarl traffic on the Bay Bridge tonight. The announcer's voice said, sudden and clear, as if it had grown stronger with every mile. Emergency crews are asking that anyone not already on the span delay their travel. For those already caught out there, officials are attempting to clear lanes as quickly as possible. The words overlapped with what she was seeing out the windshield in an uncomfortable way. There were no emergency flashes tinting the fog ahead, no red and blue strobes, no clusters of hazard lights, just the lone old car and the endless, soft, pale corridor. Mile 11, Harbor Light said quietly in her ear, right about where it went bad. Something moved at the edge of her lights, a darker shape briefly pressing against the white. For a moment the guardrail on the right seemed to buckle inward, a subtle slump in its line, then the illusion straightened as she drew closer. On the left, twice as quickly, she thought she saw something beyond the barrier, a tangle of shapes, angular and wrong, edges catching light where they shouldn't be. Then they dissolved, replaced once more by the uniform gray. She swallowed, keeping her breathing steady. "Harbor Light, where exactly are you?" she asked. "You up ahead, behind." Static strode across the channel in a quick, crackling line. "Hard to say," he replied after a beat. "Hard to be one place all the way these days, but I see you. Stick with that spacing. Don't close it down, no matter what you think you see." As if summoned, other lights flickered in the fog. To the left, barely visible through the concrete barrier's faint top edge, something flashed red, then amber, then red again, as if hazard flashers were blinking on the other side of some divide she couldn't quite locate. She caught the ghost of a headlamp beam cutting sideways where no road existed. Wisps of light, suggestions of motion. The AM announcer's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. "We're getting reports now of secondary collisions as drivers crest the mid-span and encounter stopped traffic ahead in dense fog," he said. "Repeat, if you are approaching mile 11 on the Bay Bridge, reduce your speed. Visibility is near zero. Do not assume the road ahead is clear." Mi's heart beat a little faster, not from any immediate danger she could see, but from the way those words nested inside the reality of her cab. She reached instinctively for the knob and flipped the radio off. Static died. The cab grew quieter, held only by the engine's hum and the reefer's whispered cycles. Ahead, the old car's brake lights brightened, then flickered, then glowed solid. It slowed more noticeably now, its rear end dipping just enough to show. Her foot moved to match, easing down, drawing her own speed into a calm, controlled descent. The distance between them remained generous. The fog ahead seemed to thicken all at once, like a curtain being drawn across a stage. The tail lights blurred into twin red smears, then steadied again. Shapes unfolded inside the whiteness, dark rectangles, jagged angles, then closed back. For a split second, the beam of her low lights caught something that was neither road nor rail. A vertical stripe of torn metal, bent at an unnatural angle, its surface scuffed and dull. Just beyond it, something that might have been a tire hung in the air, frozen in her perception between earth and sky. There was no motion attached to it, no sound of impact. It was a glimpse into a frame of film that had long since stopped running. Then her truck rolled forward another dozen feet. The stripe of metal became a harmless expansion joint shadow. The tire was nothing more than her own, reflected faintly off damp concrete. Her fingers were white on the steering wheel. "You're doing fine," Harborlight said, voice low and even. They never did see how close they were till they were on top of it. Fog took the distance away. "You keep that distance, you hear." She exhaled slowly through her nose. "I hear." Something shifted under the truck's wheels, a faint vibration, a slightly different tone. The concrete slabs in this section were poured a little differently, joints closer together, making the tires thrum in a new rhythm. The change traveled up through the steering column and into her arms, a tactile marker. Mile 11. The marker was invisible in the fog, but her body knew they were there. A hump of the deck, a subtle span in the air, a note in the way the wind moved. For an instant, the fog around the bridge felt crowded, full of trajectories that had been, could have been, were no more. In that instant she saw, or thought she saw, a parallel lane to her own, shimmering just beyond the guardrail. A ghost road crowded with frozen shapes of cars and trucks caught mid-brake, mid-swerve, their lights smeared into long lines. The image lasted no longer than a blink, and yet her mind rearranged it into a story it already knew. Fog, speed, the sudden impossibility of stopping. Her foot stayed gentle on the pedal. The Kenworth moved through that space with the inexorable, slow certainty of a ship cutting a calm, treacherous sea. The old car ahead maintained its slow pace, never wavering, never surprising her. The glimpses at the edges of her vision faded, resolved into nothing more than fog and darkness. The sense of weight, the emotional weight, the thick awareness of history, lifted gradually as the tires rolled on. The fog did not thin yet, but it lost that particular density it had held around the imagined mile. The road felt more like itself again, guardrail, lane, line. "You're past it," Harborlight said softly, as if relieved on her behalf. "Keep your head on, but the worst of the stories are behind you." She let herself breathe a little deeper. The analog clock on the dash ticked forward for the first time since she had noticed it stalling, its minute hand jumping to 2:51. The digital shifted to 3:16. "Where are you headed, Harborlight?" she asked. "You going all the way over, or you live out on the water somewhere?" A chuckle came back, dry and fond. "I've been out here a while," he said. "Longer than I meant to be, but I like to see folks make it across. Helps the nights pass." "Must be lonely," Me said before she thought about it. The confession surprised her a little. The idea of someone haunting a stretch of concrete out of duty and habit fit the mood of the fog too well. "Most of us on the road are alone one way or another," he answered. "We just get real good at talking across distances. You keep talking, Foxglove, keep that coffee hot, and don't race the fog, it always wins the sprint." Something softened in her chest at the knowing lilt on the last sentence. It sounded like advice from a mentor, or a friend, or someone who had run the same routes enough to learn which pieces of wisdom were worth repeating. Ahead, a faint, warm glow filtered through the fog, different from the cold white of her own headlights. The bridge's far shore, the landside lamps recoloring the air in sodium orange. The fog between those lights and her cab thinned by shades, from milk to gauze to breath. She watched the old car's tail lights merge toward that glow, then, as visibility improved, signal and move into the left lane. It never accelerated much. It simply drifted that way and continued on. As the mist lifted further, she saw that the car's paint was dull, its contours soft from age. The license plate was the older style she'd glimpsed, its registration tags years, decades out of date. The car passed under the first overhead sign for the exit and, in the brighter light, seemed to fade at the edges, growing less distinct. She blinked, and it was simply another aging vehicle in dim conditions, turning off toward an exit ramp she could now see clearly. The AM radio, still off, remained mute. Her CB hissed once, then leveled. "Looks like you got it from here," Harborlight said. "I'll be around when the fog decides to be stubborn again." Appreciate the company, me replied. She hesitated. You run that night out here a lot. It runs itself mostly, he said. I just try to talk a few folks through a cleaner version. You take care, Foxglove. Remember, distance is your friend. The line blurred with static, then steadied just long enough for one last, almost conversational addition. And when you hit land again, maybe pull over, stretch. Let the water and the stories stay where they are for a bit. She smiled a small, real curve of her mouth, unseen by anyone but herself. Will do, she said. See you in the airwaves. No answer came. The CB slipped back into its soft white hush, indistinguishable from the sound of the receding fog against the cab. The causeway's concrete gave way gradually to solid ground. Marsh grasses appeared below the guardrail in her peripheral vision, then the darker shapes of trees and the faint scatter of distant house lights. The fog remained patchy here and there, clinging in dips and draws, but above it the sky had begun to reveal a few faint stars. She crossed under the final overhead sign. In her mirror, the long line of the bridge reached back over the dark water. A pale smudge laid gently over a deeper black. No pileups glowed on it. No tangled wreckage shimmered. Just the anonymous, ordinary path other drivers would take in other hours without knowing how many different versions of one foggy night it had quietly learned to hold. On the right, just before the first off-ramp, a small roadside memorial came briefly into her headlights. A simple metal cross, no taller than her hip, set in a patch of gravel by the barrier. Someone had affixed a little marker plaque to it. She caught only 2 words as it passed. In memory. The rest vanished in the blur, the way names sometimes did when you weren't meant to learn them. Me guided the rig onto the wide, stable lanes of solid ground, feeling the subtle shift in resonance through the steering wheel. She rolled her shoulders once, letting the last of the tension ease away, and reached for her cooling coffee. In the quiet warmth of the cab, with the bay and its fog fatting behind and the long ribbon of highway unrolling ahead, it felt almost as if the night itself exhaled. Story number 6. By the time the highway began to climb toward the mountain pass, the world behind the truck had folded itself into a soft, indistinct smear of lights and rain. The small towns in the valley lay under a low lid of cloud, their distant glows diffused into halos. The higher the road went, the thicker the air became, until the wipers swept not only rain but a fine, white mist that clung to the glass in a way that didn't quite feel like weather. In the cab of his Volvo, Noah Kemp had the defroster set a touch higher than usual. Warm air sighed across the windshield, turning what wanted to be a blind, steamy surface into a clear, if narrow, view of the lane ahead. The dash lights glowed calmly, fuel at 3/4, coolant right where it belonged, oil pressure steady. The digital clock in the center read 1:41 a.m., pale blue against the black. Beyond the hood, the mountain interstate curled upward through bands of cloud and vapor, the lane markers emerging from the gray one by one like small, bright thoughts. The pavement gleamed with a damp sheen. Guardrails on the right side rose and fell in smooth arcs, their posts beaded with droplets that caught his lights in brief, pearly flashes. Now and then, the faint silhouettes of pines pushed their way into existence along the slope, their black needles blurred by low cloud. He had been on this route many times in clear weather. On those days, the summit offered an expansive view of the valley below, and in winter, the distant shine of snowfields under the moon. Tonight, there was only the enclosed little world of his cab, and the soft, glowing tunnel of road his headlights carved out of the mist. The radio stations had started to break up half an hour back, vanishing one by one into static as he gained elevation. He had turned the volume down when the last faint country ballad dissolved into white noise. The CB sat clipped and quiet, its small red channel light a reassuring dot in the corner of his vision. The hum of the engine and the soft hiss of wet tires on asphalt provided a steady, hypnotic soundtrack. He sipped from the travel mug of coffee in the cup holder, the taste a little burnt but familiar. The warmth of it against his tongue grounded him, marked the difference between the inside of the cab, where everything was known and within arm's reach, and the shifting, half-visible world outside. A green overhead sign materialized out of the murk ahead, hanging from a steel gantry that emerged from and sank back into fog in one slow movement. Summit Ridge Pass, ELEV 6872, it announced in reflective white letters. Beside the words, a symbol of a snowflake inside a triangle warned of winter conditions. Underneath, in a smaller panel, new text had been bolted on. Tunnel 2 miles. Noah blinked. The last time he had run this way, the pass had been an exposed saddle crossing, the kind where gusting crosswinds slapped at trailers and snowplows lumbered past in storms. The idea of a tunnel here had been in the works for years, mentioned in roadside cafe conversations and half-finished in news photos. To see it named on an official sign made something in his chest ease. No wind shearing across the ridge this time. No empty brakeless descent in black ice on the far side. Just the clean, steady line of a bore through stone. The fog thickened as he approached what he knew must be the summit. It flowed across the asphalt in long, horizontal bands, dense and bright in his low beams. The reflectors on the road and along the barriers shone out like floating droplets of mercury. His hands relaxed into the quiet confidence of a driver who trusted his own muscles more than any electronic aid. Then, quite suddenly, the mouth of the tunnel appeared. Two concrete portals loomed out of the white, twin arches with a central dividing wall between them. Above each, a horizontal bank of yellowish lights cast a broad, even glow down over the entrances. No big overhead sign spelled out a name. There was only a small, utilitarian green panel on the right, Summit Ridge Tunnel. Underneath, smaller type, Speed 45, lights ON, no stopping. Red and green signals over each bore burned steady. Both were green. No maintenance closure, no lane blocks. The wet pavement ran straight and true into the left opening, the white fog at its edges thinning to a dim suggestion of stone as the tunnel's light pushed against it. Noah's high beams were already off. He checked his speed, eased it down to the posted limit, and felt the familiar slight knot in his stomach that always accompanied driving into a long tunnel at night. It wasn't quite fear. It was an awareness of being about to commit. Once he entered, there would be no turning around, no pulling off. It would be just him, the concrete cylinder, and the steady forward motion until he came out the other side. He rolled under the arch. The change in sound was immediate and total. The diffuse noises of open air, wind, distant trees, the soft patter of moisture, cut off as if a door had closed. In their place came the close, rounded acoustics of the tunnel, the engine's growl reflecting back in a gentle, continuous echo. The rush of tires on wet concrete thickening into a low, sustained roar. The hum of the reefer blended into it, a high thread woven through the bass. The overhead lights were spaced at regular intervals, each a rectangle of warm, yellow-tinted fluorescence. They cast a soft, even glow that flattened shadows and turned the road surface into a muted pale strip. The walls were smooth concrete, painted a light color, their bases lined with a darker stripe that ran unbroken along both sides. Emergency niches appeared every so often, shallow recesses with red call boxes and coiled hoses, their small indicator lamps glowing quietly. He watched the tunnel swallow the last trace of outside fog in his mirrors. The rear view showed only the receding circle of the portal, framed in concrete, shrinking with each second until it was a hazy ring of lighter gray fog, far behind, then finally nothing but a vanishing point of brightness. The GPS on the dash continued to show his little truck icon moving along the line that denoted the pass. The map displayed the road as a simple curve. It did not differentiate road surface from tunnel bore. The time to his destination ticked down by a minute. Estimated arrival, 4:23 a.m. Noah settled into the middle of the lane, using the dark seam in the pavement center as his primary guide. The absence of fog inside was a relief. Visibility extended neatly to the far edge of his low beams, and then slightly beyond, tapering off into a comforting certainty that the tunnel simply kept going in the same straight line. He had driven many tunnels before, under rivers, through mountains, each with its own character. Some were raw rock, their surfaces irregular and seemingly held in place by will and rebar alone. Others were sleek, almost clinical. This one was in between, new enough that the concrete still looked clean, no soot streaks yet darkening the upper corners, but with the faint, almost imperceptible marks of its creation. Hairline seams where sections joined, fine texture in the walls. Minutes passed. The overhead lights slipped by in a regular cadence. The speedometer held steady at 45. The thermometer on the dash showed the outside temperature climbing as the sensors registered the tunnel's controlled climate. A soft hiss from the CB cut through the engine's hum. "Northbound in the summit, you got a copy?" a voice asked, clear and close, as if the speaker sat somewhere just ahead in the same echoing tube. Noah glanced at the mic, then at the empty road. He hadn't seen a vehicle ahead of him before entering. No tail lights, no hints of other motion. Reflex moved his hand to the clip anyway. "Gotcha," he said. "Northbound through the ridge, just entered a bit ago. You running ahead of me." A short pulsing crackle, then the reply. "Ahead, behind, hard to tell in these walls some nights." The voice was male, low and steady, with a slight roughness that suggested a long day and a lot of coffee. "Name's Lantern. Night like this, good to know someone else is in the pipe." "Foxglove here," Noah answered, giving the handle friends had pinned on him years ago. "You seein' anything I should know about up there, Lantern?" He waited for the usual talk. Debris in the road, a lane closure, maybe some stray cones. Instead, the voice came back after a brief pause with a different kind of alertness in it. "You keep an eye on your clocks, Foxglove," Lantern said. "This board doesn't always agree with what's on the dash." Noah's gaze dropped to the digital readout without his quite meaning it to. 1:47 a.m. The analog face of his small dash clock with its glow-in-the-dark hands pointed firmly at 1:41. The gap had narrowed. He frowned. He hadn't touched the little wind knob to adjust it. "It's a new cut, isn't it?" he said, more to continue the conversation than because he expected an answer that explained anything. "Didn't have it last time I came over this way." "New enough," Lantern replied. "Rock remembers things, though. Air does too. You ever notice how some tunnels are shorter than they feel and some are longer than they ought to be?" He thought of an older mountain tunnel in another state, one that always seemed to stretch out when driven at night, shrinking only in memory afterward. "I've had a few feel that way." "Summit's one of the latter," Lantern said. "Folks measure it one way on paper. Some nights it has other ideas." A soft hum of tires on wet concrete filled the space where other words could have gone. Noah found his mouth dry in a way he couldn't quite attribute to coffee. Ahead, the tunnel curved very gently to the left, subtle enough that the lane lines only began to drift under his hood if he stared too long at one spot. He traced the bend with the steering wheel, feeling the slight lean. As he rounded that easy arc, something shifted in the acoustic. The engine's echo seemed to slide sideways for a heartbeat, as if reflected from an invisible object in the bore. Somewhere far ahead, a flicker of light moved in his peripheral vision, an almost color, a suggestion of white glare on metal tucked just around the bend. He eased off the throttle a fraction, not enough for any sudden change, just enough to let his speed bleed down by 2-3 miles per hour. Then he saw them, very faint, very far, a pair of taillights, dim and small against the tunnel's steady glow. They hung there in the distance, suspended points of dull red, the exact shade of old incandescent bulbs behind dusty plastic, not the sharper cherry of modern LED clusters. The little dots bobbed subtly, up and down, as if mounted on an older suspension. His foot hovered over the accelerator, ready to close the gap a little, but Lantern's earlier words about ahead, behind, nested next to his instinct. "You got company now," he said into the mic, eyes on the tiny red embers. "One set of tail lights way up. That you?" The CB responded with a brief wash of static. Then Lantern's voice, quieter, almost amused. "Could be," he said. "Could be you're catching up to someone else doing what we're doing now back some while. Make sure you leave room either way. Distance keeps things from tangling." It made no literal sense, and yet it made a kind of emotional sense that fit the way the tunnel felt, suspended, detached from the ordinary sag of time outside. Noah kept his speed where it was, letting the gap remain. The points of red ahead neither grew larger nor vanished. They simply existed, steady markers somewhere up the line. He glanced at the tunnel walls. The smooth concrete bore a faint streaking near the ceiling now, lines of moisture where water had seeped through and evaporated, leaving paler trails. Graffiti had already begun to appear near some of the recesses, small, hastily sprayed tags and symbols, their colors dulled under the tunnel's lights. As he passed one emergency niche, something inside it caught his eye. A reflective vest draped over a chair, a white hard hat on a hook. The small window set into the niche's door showed a room beyond, lit by a single fluorescent tube. For a moment, as his truck rolled past, he thought he saw someone sitting inside, just out of direct view, a hunched shape at a desk, the glow of a computer monitor on an unseen face. When he checked his mirror a heartbeat later, the niche was already behind him, nothing but a brief rectangle of brightness slipping away. The sense of having briefly glanced into another little world, sealed within concrete, lingered. "You alone in there, Lantern?" he asked, more casually than he felt. "Far as I know," came the answer. "Though some nights sounds like otherwise. You ever hear your own motor twice in these bores? Echo comes back weird, like there's another rig packing you on the other side of the wall." The thought made his shoulders tighten slightly, though the tone in Lantern's voice remained easy. As if on cue, up above the normal rumble of his engine, another sound slipped into his hearing. A second engine. Not loud, not distinct, but there. A slightly higher pitch, a little off from his own RPMs, as though another truck were running just out of sight, separated by some narrow thickness of concrete. He listened, not trusting ears alone. The extra sound swelled when he accelerated a little and eased when he did, but not in perfect sync. It was like hearing someone hum along a beat behind a song. His eyes went to the right-hand wall. The painted stripe at its base marched alongside, unbroken. No service bay doors, no cross-tunnel, just the unending curve of concrete. "Feels like a duet," Lantern said quietly. "Happens strongest around halfway. Don't let it spook you. Just means you're between what was and what'll be." The clocks, digital and analog, caught his attention again. The blue numbers now read 1:53. The round clock's hand, stubborn, had only just crawled past 1:42. The discrepancy had grown, shrunk, grown again. It was as if they each believed in a different version of the night. "How long this tunnel supposed to be?" Noah asked. "On paper," Lantern replied, "just over 2 miles. About 5 minutes of your life. Some nights that's all it is. Others, folks feel like they've been in here a bit longer. Unload at the dock swear they were under the rock half an hour, but their logbooks don't say so." The overhead lights flowed by in their steady rhythm. Something in that repetition did feel stretched, not boring exactly, but insistent. An impression of being slightly stuck, like the feeling of trying to recall a word that wouldn't come. Noah checked the odometer. He had entered the tunnel at an even number of miles. Now it showed exactly 4 more. He'd been inside long enough to have cleared it twice if it were really 2 miles. Up ahead, the faint tail lights flickered, then grew a fraction larger. The vehicle they belonged to had slowed a little. He adjusted his own speed in response, keeping the buffer. For just a second, as his low beams kissed the edges of whatever ran ahead, he glimpsed more of it. The smooth, rounded back of an older tractor, its paint a dull dark, its silhouette lower than the modern aerodynamic shapes. The trailer behind it bore a faded logo in colors he half recognized from childhood, a shipping company that had merged into others decades ago. The picture was there, then gone. He could have decided it was a trick of the light and his own memory. The tunnel made it easy for that sort of thinking to take root. Ever feel like you're sharing the road with folks not quite in your lane? Lantern asked, voice gentle. Same pavement, different nights. That what this is, Noah said. Some kind of overlap. Maybe, Lantern answered. Maybe some nights this place remembers every load that's ever rolled through and lets the ones who are paying attention hear them humming alongside. The idea should have been unnerving. Instead, a strange sense of companionship eased into Noah's awareness. The notion of ghost convoys, other trucks in other years, other drivers watching the same walls and lights while thinking their own midnight thoughts, turned the tunnel from a potentially claustrophobic tube into a shared space, layered with invisible presence. The hum of the second engine stayed with him, up near the roofline of the bore, sometimes louder, sometimes barely there. Once, when he passed another emergency niche, he heard something like the faint crackle of a radio within, as if someone else, decades away, were calling out a status to someone in a control room. The clocks continued their odd disagreement. The digital jumped to 2:01 all at once, as if an invisible hand had hurried it along. The analog lagged, stubbornly moving its minute hand to 1:45. You're about through the middle, Lantern said. Once you feel the grade tip down a little, you'll know you're headed for daylight. Just remember, when you come out, don't be too quick to act like nothing happened. Give yourself a breath. How long have you been talking folks through this? Noah asked. Since the first night I didn't make it all the way through in one piece, Lantern replied lightly, without bitterness. Mountain took my rig and left me the Echo. Figured I might as well use it. The words landed without any gruesome detail, just a quiet admission that fit the before and after nature of the pass. The image that came with it, a truck sliding on ice, a barrier, a sudden absence, stayed firmly non-visual, held at arm's length by the tunnel's warm light. Noah's right hand tightened on the wheel just once. Then he felt it, the slightest easing in the air pressure in his ears, the subtlest difference in the pull of the road under the tires. A downgrade, barely noticeable but there. The taillights ahead brightened, as if their driver had brushed their brakes in response to the same change. Then slowly, they began to fade, sinking farther into the luminous haze of the tunnel's far end. The extra engine note over his head thinned, unspooling like a song reaching its last bar. He could see a suggestion of something brighter ahead now, a wide, pale disk that might be the exit, its light a cooler white than the tunnel's yellow lamps. The overhead rectangles of light grew a touch more widely spaced, or at least it felt that way. The tunnel seemed to be breathing out. You're just about there, Lantern said. Slowly as you like. There's no rush on the other side worth hurrying your heart for. Noah eased off the throttle another notch, letting the truck's momentum carry it. The walls seemed to widen a fraction, though he knew that was an illusion. The emergency niches slipped by. One of them held nothing visible at all this time but an empty chair, a coil of hose, a small red box with its indicator dark. The digital clock rolled over to 2:07. The analog, with a kind of stubborn dignity, crawled its way to just past 1:50. As he neared the exit, the arc of bright white widened, until the tunnel's structure framed it like the iris of a mechanical eye. Beyond, nothing was clearly visible yet, only a diffuse brightness and a sense of open air. Just before he reached the threshold between the tunnel light and the outside, the CB crackled softly one last time. Take care, Foxglove, Lantern said. If you ever hear me again in another bore, do me a favor and remember the distance. Between rigs, between years, between what almost happens and what doesn't. I'll remember, Noah said, See you in the echo." A faint chuckle came through, then static. Then only the steady hum of his own engine remained. The truck's nose slid out of the tunnel and into the wet night. The change was as complete as the entry had been. Sound opened up, expanding from compressed echo to full, damp air. The patter of light rain on the cab's roof reasserted itself. The fog outside was thinner here, lying in tatters that clung to roadside trees and drifted across the lanes in slow veils. The headlights reached farther, catching the striped legs of the guardrail and the dark shapes of evergreens on the slope. He glanced into his mirrors out of habit. The tunnel behind him gaped like the mouth of some vast creature, its interior lights glowing warm and calm. The circle of brightness framed the pale concrete ribbon inside. For a fleeting second, as the perspective aligned just so, he thought he saw another truck deep in there, dull red tail lights, an older cab shape. Then the angle changed, and it was only dark concrete and yellow rectangles, and then his own trailer blocked the view. The GPS chirped as it reacquired full satellite signal. The map realigned. His little icon now showed on the far side of the pass, dropping toward the next stretch of highway. The time to destination recalculated, 4:24 a.m. He had lost, according to the device, perhaps 1 extra minute to the tunnel. No more. The analog clock read 2:01 now, its hands finally making their own quiet compromise. The digital on the dash agreed, both sets of numbers blinking in unison for the first time in an hour. He rolled down the grade, the engine brake murmuring, the distant glow of a truck stop at the base of the mountains just visible as a smear of orange against the dark. The rain eased. The fog thinned further. The world outside the cab became once again the ordinary, wide, open highway. As the miles unfurled, the memory of the tunnel's stretch time feeling settled into something not entirely eerie, but almost comforting. The image of overlapping convoys, of other rigs in other midnights, the hum of their presence just on the other side of a wall, made the solitary run feel less empty. Far behind him, inside the rock, the lights would continue to burn. Engines would echo. A voice might now and then crackle into some driver's cab, offering quiet company and reminders about distance. Noah signaled and eased into the rightmost lane as the grade flattened, preparing to pull into the lights of the truck stop ahead. The night around him felt a fraction less deep. The fog no longer seemed like something that wanted to swallow him. It lay in pockets along the ditches and low ground, content to simply be. He parked under the wide glow of the fuel island canopy, engine ticking as it cooled. For a moment in the stillness after the motor cut off, he thought he heard faintly the echo of another rig idle in a concrete tube far away, the sound softened by distance and stone. It faded quickly, replaced by the clink of fuel nozzles, the murmur of other drivers, the hiss of air lines. The mountain and its long, breathing tunnel lay back up the grade, waiting patiently for whoever would pass through next, holding its layers of nights together in the slow, quiet way that rock and echo know best.